Hello and welcome to GNA Academy, where our goal and purpose is to train journalists to tell stories about what God is doing around the world. The psalmist writes, "Declare His glory among the nations, His marvelous deeds among all peoples." In this video, we'll look at the principles and practices the Global News Alliance uses to tell stories about God's marvelous deeds. We'll discuss the broad topic of what qualifies as a news story for GNA, and then we'll explore the technical and stylistic elements that make our journalism similar to quality journalism anywhere, but also different from secular journalism as practiced by reporters and editors who deny the existence and power of God. So let's get started by looking at the foundational issues and concepts that direct our approach to news here at Global News Alliance. As I'm sure you're aware, Global News Alliance stories focus on the life and work of the church around the world. We don't focus on the news of the day from a Christian worldview. Rather, we produce stories that tell what the Big C church is doing. News stories that GNA tells often look at the ways that the church is interacting with the world around them. For example, a quick review of the GNA website will show you the kinds of stories that we're currently following. Lebanese Christians providing aid to local victims of war, churches and ministries responding to natural disasters around the world, and a prayer gathering for peace in Ukraine. There's no end to the types of stories that GNA reporters and editors produce when they look at local churches, parachurch organizations, ministries, and ecclesiastical organizations and their day-to-day activities. These reported news stories are made available to GNA affiliate media outlets around the world who then share them with their audiences. As a GNA reporter, your work may be seen by a truly global audience. Most of these audience members are Christian believers, but some of them also may be non-believers who are interested in learning more about the Christian faith. For this reason, we want to make sure that our stories are understandable to non-Christians. Jesus said, "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Regarding doctrine, GNA agrees with the statements of faith adopted by the Lausanne Movement and the National Religious Broadcaster Statement of Faith. While church doctrine is typically not the focus of GNA news stories, we should be careful and respectful when our stories touch on areas of doctrinal differences. And finally, our GNA news stories are provided in English and Spanish, our trade languages. Some of our affiliates translate and/or dub our stories into other languages as appropriate. Now, on to the topic of what constitutes good journalism. Reporting that is factually accurate, fair and balanced, and that gives voice to those on the margins is an important service to any community. When those stories also inform members of the church about what God is doing around the world, their importance increases exponentially. Our stories must use concrete facts to anchor stories to real-life situations or events, and they should anticipate the questions that your audience would ask. As with journalistic reporting the world over, answer the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. But it's not enough to just tell the facts. In today's competitive media environment, you must attract your audience by developing strong storytelling skills. See our GNA Academy interviews on the topic of journalistic storytelling and watch reports from good storytellers. Often these reports connect on a human level with participants and eyewitnesses on location, and using their perspective tell a story that connects on multiple levels with our intellect, with our emotions, and with our spirit. Now let's take a few minutes to focus on a core tenet of journalism: truth. Truth is powerful. Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Trust in journalism worldwide is at an all-time low. The spread of disinformation and fake news means that we have to work harder to win people's trust as a truthful, reliable source of news and information. But it won't be easy. Trust is earned over time. but it can be lost in an instant by biased or careless work. We strive for excellence in every aspect of our work: accuracy, production quality, storytelling skills, consistency, and creativity. Honesty and integrity are at the heart of what we do, and we encourage you to make it the center of your reporting. GNA stories are usually between 1.5 to 3.5 minutes in length. Longer stories, up to 4 to 5 minutes, are accepted if the content is compelling, well shot, and produced. If in doubt about a longer piece, send it to our editors for review. They may accept the longer piece, or they may have advice about where to trim unnecessary content. When shooting and editing, be sure to remember that our desired video quality is 1920 by 1080, otherwise known as full high definition, in a horizontal orientation. Vertical video clips may be used sparingly, with a blurred, expanded copy of the same clip filling the empty screen space on either side. Frame rate may depend on your local video system, but either 25 or 30 frames per second is acceptable. Submitted videos should be either the .mov or .mp4 or .mxf extensions. Most modern video apps can export video in one or more of these formats. Lower quality video can be used in some cases when the content is essential to the story. For example, historical video clips, video shot in emergency situations, or recorded by bystanders. Clean versions of news stories, that is, without lower third name supers or logos, also known as bugs, are preferred. However, lower third names and information should be provided separately so that the media affiliates can add identifying supers as desired. When providing names and titles, be sure to confirm the spelling of the name. I find it to be extremely helpful to have each interviewee at the very beginning of the recording say and spell his or her name, and then indicate what title would be appropriate for listing on screen. For example, pastor, business owner, city manager, etc.
But many people know me as Michael Bahinyoza. Bahinyoza would be Bahinyoza.
If a person's name or a proper noun, for example, the name of a city, is mentioned in the anchored lead-in, be sure to provide pronunciation clues, that is, phonetic spelling. If you're not sure how to use phonetic spelling, there are online guides available, and I'll provide a link in the program description below. When it comes to audience interest and attention, clear and balanced audio is just as important to the story as good video. Make sure the audio levels are consistent throughout the report. Record reporter voiceovers or narration with good equipment in a quiet environment. Sometimes reporters improvise by recording the voiceover in a closed closet or even in a car on a quiet street. Don't remove the nat sound, that is, the natural or ambient sound from video clips when editing. Nat sound adds authenticity to the story, but it works best when it's kept at low levels to not interfere with the voiceover or main audio. A nat sound bridge, a couple of seconds of video with nat sound without narration, can provide a breathing pause for some reports, making the story more interesting and engaging. Here's a short example.
Yeah, I just decided to do it for them.
We are at Robben Island. I have swimmers in the water.
Moved by the biblical call to care for orphans.
When it comes to music, most times it should be avoided as it tends to manipulate emotions. But music that is part of the story itself, that is, music at an event or in a marketplace or a congregation singing, can be important for communicating the spirit of the activity, and it will enhance the story. One other concern regarding music is copyright issues, which must be avoided. And speaking of copyright, all videos must be authorized by GNA and cleared for on-air use. Generally speaking, a person responding to interview questions about a news event is giving implied consent to be part of the reported story. But if in doubt, a good strategy is to ask the person while recording if you have permission to use their comments in a news story for Global News Alliance and its affiliates. Copyright violations can create complications and prove very costly to resolve. Attributions or credit should be given when using audio or video from sources other than your own. And please list all uncleared audio or video clips in your story submission form. Also, avoid the use of AI-generated content unless pre-approved by a GNA editor. Regarding reporter stand-ups, they're allowed but not required. Reporter stand-ups are short, two-camera segments that add information, provide a story transition, or highlight something significant at the location where the news event took place. Stand-ups should only be included if the reporter looks confident in front of the camera, is appropriately dressed, and speaks with authority. A good stand-up can provide authenticity and build trust in the reporter. Here's an example of a reporter stand-up that adds value to the news report.
Which was under Russian occupation. And Mercy Projects behind me is providing wood stoves for people in this town. Mostly elderly people are the only people left behind. And so this ministry is demonstrating God's love in action here today in East Ukraine.
So what makes a news story interesting to its audience? Typically, things that make a news story newsworthy are commonly listed as timeliness, proximity, impact or consequence, novelty or rarity, conflict, human interest, and prominence. News stories are different from promotional stories. News stories for GNA should not be confused with video news releases or documentaries or testimonies. However, you may personalize a news story by including an individual story or testimony as an illustration of the larger story. There's another important distinction to be made that is determined by timeliness. News can be categorized as either hard news or soft news. Hard news reports typically cover fast-moving stories, natural disasters, political upheavals, etc. They're timely, important, and consequential stories. Hard news has a very brief shelf life and must be aired as soon as possible after the event. On the other hand, soft news or news features typically cover less urgent events or highlight social issues, trends, or projects, and often have a human interest focus. Soft news stories don't lose their relevance for weeks or in some cases for months and are referred to as evergreen stories. But regardless of whether your story is timely or evergreen, it is important that it be a topic of interest to an international audience. The best stories have universal appeal, human interest, and international impact. Do not include details or information that is only meaningful or understood by local audiences. And be sure to explain essential information that would be unfamiliar to international audiences. Stories should fit into a generally accepted international news reporting style. For reference, note how BBC, CNN, or other major international networks produce their reporter packages. And finally, pre-approval of a story by GNA is highly advised to give an opportunity to discuss the story focus, content, and shooting strategy before production begins. All submitted reports are subject to approval by a GNA news editor, and adjustments may be required before the story is eligible for distribution. By submitting a report to GNA, you are authorizing and granting permission for the report to be distributed by the Global News Alliance. For more information about submitting news stories to Global News Alliance, be sure to contact us on our webpage, gna.news, or reach out via email. Thank you for your interest in reporting news about what God is doing in the world and for partnering with Global News Alliance to share those reports with a global audience. Until next time, may God bless and keep you.